name is Catherine Hayden and welcome to this ACECQA video exploring the role of the educational leader. This panel discussion takes two key perspectives on the role of the educational leader. One, to hear from educational leaders directly about what it's like to be in the role and what it's like to develop the role and support continuous improvement and quality within their particular settings. The other perspective we're going to take is thinking about the role of the educational leader from the approved provider perspective. And this is really significant in the sense that we've had a shift in the way we understand educational leaders and how important it is that they receive really key support from the approved provider. The panel we've got today is made up of two educational leaders, one who works in an early childhood service and one who works in a school aged care service. And we're also joined by an approved provider who manages early childhood and school aged care services. It's important to note here that we're seeking their thoughts and ideas around what it's like to be an educational leader and support educational leaders. And I'm sure they'd like me to let you know that they don't think they're particular experts, although they have a lot of experience and have done a great deal of work in thinking about this role. But they want to share with you their ideas and their thoughts about what it's like to support educational leaders and be an educational leader over the last little while. We're going to have a bit of a conversation and discussion about that. We've got a few questions to ask and we're going to generate some discussion here. We'd like you to feel like you're part of this conversation. So at any point you want to pause this video and perhaps gather some other people together and have a think about what it's like to be an educational leader or support an educational leader, then we really encourage you to do so. You might also want to gather a couple of people together to watch this video and give you a bit of an opportunity to generate some discussions and ideas that you might want to have with the rest of your colleagues. We also encourage you to use this as a way of thinking more broadly around the role of the educational leader. There might be some ideas that are generated or some discussion points or some questions that are generated in this conversation that you'd really like to take forward and have a think a bit more about in terms of your particular context. And it's a way of helping you support a deeper conversation around the educational leader. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce our panel. We have here Kylie, Rowena and Jess. And I'm going to ask each of them in turn, just to start us off in this conversation, to introduce themselves, tell us where they work, and also tell us a bit about how the role of the educational leader is constructed, how they undertake that work, and how it's supported in that particular context. So, Kylie, I wonder whether you can start us off by telling us a little bit about where you work and what the role looks like for you.
Sure. I'm from Forest School Hours Care and have been in the role since 2013 when I started there. At the time, I took on the role of the assistant director as well, and then it probably took about 18 months before I realised that the educational leader role was well deserving of a role in its own right, and negotiated with our P&C to separate the roles out, and have been acting in the educational leader role since then as a separate role, 32 hours a week out of ratio.
Great, thank you very much for clarifying that. It's an important thing to note, the separation of the two roles. Yeah. And Rowena, do you want to tell us a little bit about you and how the educational leader role works for you?
Yeah, sure. So I work at ACECQA in Monica, and I came and joined the team when they were going through a period of change around staffing arrangements. So it gave us a really good opportunity to actually sit down, the director and I, and come up with something that actually was going to suit our context. So we looked at what the needs of the service was, what some different approaches that were out there, and also what particular skills and experience that I had, and then we came up with something that suited our context. So part of that is that I work in a designated role as the pedagogical leader, and I work 5 days a week in that role during school hours.
Fantastic, thank you for that. And Jess, you come to us and you joined the panel as a representative of the approved provider, so you are not an educational leader, but you support educational leaders. So can you tell us a little bit about your role, where you work, and how you have constructed the roles of the educational leader?
Yeah, of course. So I work for the YMCA Canberra, and I work as the early learning manager. So as a part of our group, we have 5 early learning centres. Each of those services have an educational leader working at their service as a full-time employee over there.
And we also have about 13 outside school hours services as well, with 2 dedicated educational leaders to work with those services and the educators and coordinators there. So we've got quite a comprehensive team of educational leaders working with us.
And you would work with them on a regular basis?
Yeah, so I visit the services on a regular basis, and we also have a quality assurance manager that also works more directly with our educational leaders as well on quality assurance and the quality areas.
Okay, very good. One of the things that we've talked lots about, and over recent times the whole sector has had a discussion about this, is how we see the role of the educational leader. What do we imagine is possible in that role? So I wonder whether we can now shift a conversation from some of the mechanics around the role of the educational leader into how we might see the role. And maybe, Jess, you could start us off by saying, from your perspective, what's your vision for the role? What do you see it playing out in the services for the YMCA?
Yeah, so we've had the role's evolved quite a lot for us since we were sort of handed the regulation that required an educational leader. But today my vision for that is that we have a person working in our services that is a lot more practical than what was possible previously. So when we had centre directors, it was more of an oversight of the practice and the pedagogy in the service, whereas now, we have someone that's really active with our educators, working, side by side with them, mentoring and coaching. So we've been able to evolve it from quite a volunteer-based position to having this full-time role that's dedicated to that mentoring of educators and being really active with them.
And Kylie and Rowena, this is a slightly different sort of question for you because you are educational leaders. So I wonder whether you can sort of elaborate on what Jess was saying. Do you have a sense of the way that the educational leader impacts on the services you provide? What has it managed to do in recent times?
I think for us, it's given us opportunity, I think, to spend a little bit more time looking really deeply at things that we wouldn't necessarily have been able to do. And so particularly, using practitioner inquiry projects to really closely examine areas that we've identified through other forms of reflective practice and through our self-assessment and through even individual performance appraisals and things like that. We're able to sort of identify an area that we want to look closely, and having someone designated in that role really helps to achieve that.
And Kylie, from a school aged care perspective, what do you think the vision for the educational leader is?
I think for school aged care in particular, it was really important in putting further distance from that idea that school aged care is still the babysitter for children. So that professional identity around us as a sector, I think the educational leader's done a lot to support that. And I think specific to our service, it's certainly allowed us to offer the program that we do based so heavily on play and risk, in the sense that with me being out of ratio, school aged care suffers, I suppose, such a great turnover of staff and educators, particularly a younger cohort that are never going to make a career out of it. So offering something like that can be quite challenging unless there's someone in that role there all the time to support it and continually train and mentor people through that.
So would you say that the educational leader has helped you do things you wouldn't be able to normally do?
Absolutely.
Can you give us an example of something that you've been able to achieve that otherwise wouldn't have been able to be achieved?
Probably the idea of what our program is based around, a lot of risk-taking and play for the sake of play, whilst it aligns very nicely to My Time Our Place. Play for the sake of play, and basically giving children back their childhood, having someone that's dedicated to the role to advocate that to all the stakeholders and be able to explain it and have the time to find the research to back it and not just spiel it off, has really allowed us to do a lot more than some programs are able to offer.
Thank you for that. Rowena, do you want to add to that? Is there something particularly that you think you've been able to undertake because you have a role there, dedicated role as an educational leader?
I think in addition to the practitioner inquiry projects, probably also actually really investing in our trainee educators and student educators. So we take that role really seriously when we have people who are coming into our centre to make sure that they're getting, you know, a really good start to their career in early education and care. So having that role allows us to sort of invest in that time a little bit more.
And Jess, would you be able to identify something that you've seen happen in one of the services that's happened because you've had educational leaders in those roles?
Look, I probably wouldn't pick a particular service, but I think overall having a group of educational leaders that have been able to work together with us as an organisation to sort of build their own vision for their services, but also combine to deliver the vision that we have for the organisation as well, in terms of pedagogy and practice. So it's been really great to be able to have access to their time and then get them to go back to their services and actually deliver that information and still have the uniqueness in their services and their own philosophies and visions that they have as an individual and an individual service. So we have we've been able to bring most of our services into that exceeding rating area, which is fantastic, and that I think has a huge impact from having those educational leaders being able to assist with that.
You can see a direct correlation.
Yeah.
And I guess this probably goes and helps us get to a really important question in the educational leader space is who should be the educational leader? I think many people ask that question. We have lots of discussions about that. In fact, some of our audience today might be thinking, you know, who should be the educational leader? And the approved providers who are watching might be thinking, who should we appoint? And one of the really key questions I'd like to put to you as panel members is about the skills and attributes and knowledge that an educational leader need. And I wonder whether we can start with our educational leaders, and maybe Kylie, you can share with us what you think about this. What are the skills, attributes, knowledge that an educational leader needs to do this work?
Sure.
Easy question, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think people got really caught up with it being a brand new role and having to start from scratch and come up with something for it, whereas a lot of the stuff around the skills and attributes was there because it can be taken from any kind of leadership position. So I think really the key to it is someone that's driven, a love for knowledge and learning, but someone that's really prepared to find a vision that works for their service, their context, families and children, and not give up on it. Someone that's passionate enough to really drive that vision.
Yeah, so a bit of energy.
Lots of energy.
Yeah. Rowena, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think to be an exceptional listener, I think is really important. I think educators need to know that they're heard and that you have a really genuine investment in them, and also to be a reflective practitioner yourself. I think that's essential, and to also find to be motivated by learning yourself, as well as to be able to find ways to motivate that learning in others as well.
And while we're having this discussion, before we move on to an approved provider perspective, I wonder whether you can help us out with this knowledge thing. Do educational leaders need to know everything?
No. And I think the biggest part of that is, certainly from my experience, admitting that to your team, that you're not some kind of magical oracle that sits up there with all the answers. I think one of the things that's definitely helped with my team, and maybe it is the age thing with a lot of teenagers and stuff on the board, is admitting that I don't know the answers. I'll get back to you. I'll go and find it. Or simply, no, let's work it out together. I've got absolutely no idea.
Ryan, do you want to add to that?
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think learning how to be a little bit vulnerable as well, and to be humble in your leadership too, I think is really important, because I certainly don't have all the answers, and I think sometimes people wish I probably did, but it's about learning together, I guess, and like Kylie was saying let's go find the answers together. And I think that's a really important attribute to being an educational leader.
And I know, Jess, you're dying to say something about this, and I think from an approved provider perspective, this is a very important question. Who are you looking to recruit? Who are you looking to cultivate? How do you do that? So do you want to add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, I can. It's actually one of the questions we ask when we are recruiting is what qualities do you, of the person that we're interviewing, what qualities do you think an educational leader should possess, and then secondary to that, do you believe that you possess those?
Yeah.
And it is interesting to see the answers that are coming back to us, because we need to know that they understand the role and understand what types of skills and attributes they should have for themselves to be in that role. I guess I agree with both of these two as well, is that energy creates motivation, so someone who has that sort of that right character in the role, but someone that doesn't necessarily know everything, but they know where to find the answers, they know how to ask questions of other people. What do you think about, you know, whatever the topic is, and sort of gather other people's opinions and then create a direction or a vision for that, so that it is a bit of a collaborative effort. So they certainly don't need to know everything, but they need to know where to find things. They need to have a bit of their own knowledge behind them as well. And they also need to like talking to people. They need to, they need to be wanting to be out there talking to people and not shying away from having to, go out and observe and ask questions, or, sometimes the scenarios do turn a little bit sometimes where you have to have difficult conversations or challenging conversations with people as part of your work, but hopefully to bring that around to have a good outcome in the end.
And just in terms of being of that recruitment process, have you managed in recent times to sort of tighten up your expectations? And
absolutely, yeah. So we, it's evolved over time where we've had it being a voluntary position with no sort of requirements to it, it sort of went into an assistant director position, which really was a bit more operational and administrative, to then realising that we really wanted to move that into an educational leader type of position. So over many, many years that's changed to what we're looking at the moment is someone, and I don't think we've really got the cohort of professional educational leaders out in the community yet, because it's such a new type of position. Like if you were looking for a lead educator or a director, you've got people who have been in those roles and are moving on to a different challenge or something like that. At the moment, when we're recruiting for an educational leader, it's usually not someone who's been sitting in that role previously. It's someone who's coming from a lead educator role or an early childhood teacher, moving into a leadership position. So we're working with those people to have really clear expectations of what the role is and what we are looking for in the person that's going to deliver that position, but also understanding that people will need upskilling. They'll need some mentoring from either the provider or the centre director to be successful in that position. And I hope and I foresee that in the future, in the next couple of years, that we'll have educational leaders that are experienced as an educational leader coming through when we're recruiting as well, because the positions will just evolve over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that insight. It's very helpful to have a sense of what how it's evolving over time. And you can hear from your discussion so far how important it is that there are really some key knowledge, skills and attributes that are required in the role. And I wonder whether, Kylie and Rowena, you might tell us a little bit about how you develop those skills yourself, and what support you might get. So Kylie, do you want to share with us how you've developed those skills and knowledge and capabilities around that role?
Sure. I think a big thing was finding a mentor from outside of your own service. I think being able to see what you're doing at your service from an outside perspective often opens up cans of worms, but can also lead you in the right direction as well. I think reading everything you possibly can around leadership and not specific to early childhood. I think the key for me was recognising that everything that I'd been taught previously under old systems around early childhood and to do with children could be applied to educators as the educational leader. So things like those fabulous quotes that go around Facebook, like if they're not learning the way you teach the way that they learn. All those kind of little things that we love to throw out there with children, I started to adopt as the educational leader to the educators and realise the importance of that role almost mirrored the relationship of the educator to the child. But I think with what I was mentioning before with the vision, they have to see that you believe in it too. So for me, around play and risk, it was definitely investing in my own professional development as well as having support from the service financially to go on study tours. So I've been on 3 now to America and the UK around play and risk, and brought all of that back to the service so they can see that I live and breathe it, and it's often a lot easier to jump on board that vision when you can see the person driving it isn't just doing it to tick a box. They truly believe in it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And Rowena, what do you think about your own development as an educational leader? Where do you get your support from, and how do you do that?
I am like Kylie. I think too. I've always, I think since beginning my career, even as an educator, have always invested in mentoring and coaching, either informally and then at times throughout my career in really formal kind of ways, and that's been hugely beneficial. And I can think of times too where I've been challenged. Or wanted to find a little bit more of an effective way to lead, and to lead myself and to lead others as well. So things like investing in my own professional learning through professional reading and that kind of thing was really important. But then also having programs such as the ECA leadership program that really helped to give me some direction about where how I could grow in that area as well, which was really hugely beneficial for my role as an educational leader.
And while we're talking about the support that you have, can you talk a little bit about how your approved provider supports you? You keep going on that, sure. Rowena?
So one of the things when we developed my position statement, we also there was a section that included working together as a community. And so to support me in my role, I actually have time allocated to create a network within our area, in our wider community, so we can all come together, educational leaders can come together. So my provider actually supports me through that by enabling me to, participate in it.
Great. And Kylie, your approved provider, talk about the support that's offered there specifically.
Yeah, so it was our approved provider is our P&C, and it was through them that I negotiated to have the role separated.
That's the parent council of the school.
Sorry,
That's
yes.
right.
Yeah.
We might have some people listening and watching from different parts of Australia, so just wanted to clarify that to you.
Yeah, and in setting up that role, they were asking what I would need to be able to do it, and when I put forward the time frame that was slightly controversial, I had to obviously justify why 32 hours out of ratio would be beneficial to the service. And it was around that kind of stuff of being able to join the networks that are being set up out there and have time to go and visit other services to see what they were doing. And largely it was around professional development. So we negotiated a professional development budget that we hadn't previously had. It was just kind of, well, we need to do first aid training. Can we have X amount of money at the time? Whereas we set up a proper budget that was looked at each year, and it's part of my role to work out where the funds of that go and where it's allocated, but also to run professional development for our team internally 3 times a term as the educational leader. So obviously I was going to need time to put that together, link it to frameworks, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so that's been a massive support in just having the time really to do those things. Yeah.
And Jess, you're manager of a range of different services. Can you talk a little bit about sort of some of the structures that you set up to support educational leaders? You've obviously shifted in recent times to have an actual role dedicated, but how some of the mechanics around supporting them?
Yeah, so we do quite a lot. We encourage our educational leaders and centre directors to be a part of our local networks and groups that are happening, including the one Rowena was referring to. But we also do a lot of internal networking, and we make sure that we get those educational leaders together on a regular basis, so they come together about once a month to discuss either a topic that seems to be common that we've identified from visits out to the centres or talking to them themselves or centre directors. So it might be a particular quality area that we have a look over, and they discuss how they're, what they're seeing in their own services, what the challenges are, what the great things are that are happening in their service, or it might be a really, really particular thing that we're diving into. But we try and keep those meetings and those get-togethers that way aligned, rather than talking about operational aspects or anything like that. So we're really delving into some of that reflective practice, and then they can take their thoughts back to their centres and, share ideas. We do a lot of professional development with all of our educators, educational leaders and centre directors as well. So some of that might be their individual needs. When I was talking about recruitment a bit earlier, when we're talking about bringing lead educators up into positions of educational leaders, it's often around leadership. So a lot of leadership training or courses and things like that, as well as the mentoring from internally with our management structures and their centre directors that are always there with them, meeting with them on a regular basis, and a lot of things like that.
Great.
Yeah.
It's really helpful to, I think, identify some of those structural things that support the role of the educational leader. I wonder whether we can now shift to a really important question that gets often talked about on social media and in networks, I'm sure. What happens when there are challenging situations for the role of the educational leader? This is something that I think is important to discuss. What happens when you've got a situation where practice is problematic and you want to really shift the way people do things, but you're met with significant resistance at times, or you found challenging circumstances. So I wonder whether we can now shift to a conversation around the challenges of the role of the educational leader. So Rowena, do you want to start us off by talking about some of the things that you found challenging, and if along the way you can share with us some of your insights in how to shift practice, and that might be really helpful for the people who are watching.
Sure thing. I think with changing practice or shifting practice, relationships are essential, and I don't think without that you're going to have much luck, or it's going to be even more challenging. So I do think that change also takes time. So I probably when I've experienced challenges like that, and I definitely, I think we all probably have. I invest in that relationship, and I try to also understand, what it is behind that person's thinking and the way that they're contributing to that practice, and then we have some conversations around that. I also I think the part of the reason I wanted to learn more about different ways to lead helped me to sort of work out that I could actually, by working out what motivated other people, actually helped me lead them, and it helped me get that buy-in, because when I had that connection with them, either at a professional or a personal level, we were able to sort of create that vision together a little bit more effectively, so that the relationships were critical.
And the challenges you faced are about change mostly. Is that where it's been centred?
Yeah, I think so. Uncertainty. Sometimes it has been around just differences in views, different pedagogical views and philosophical views, and so we have some really respectful and open conversations about that, and I guess naming the challenges as well, and having some pretty brave conversations is part of addressing it and moving forward.
Yeah. And Kylie, your challenges, what's been really challenging in the role?
I think justifying the role to families has been a big thing for us as well. The P&C obviously change over time, so you have to kind of renegotiate that. For a long time it was 6 monthly stints for me in that role, and having to justify it each time. I would definitely say that in terms of practice on the floor, as Rowena was saying, it's relationships, and I think that for me was a big thing in separating those two roles out, because you do naturally just have a different relationship regardless of who's in the role with your director or your educational leader. So the moment that I had to stop calling people on, you've walked in the door 5 minutes late, where's your name badge, all that kind of stuff, which I could be doing, but we separated that out and let kind of the assistant directors deal with that. The relationship shifted and they were a lot more open to those conversations that you have to have when it's a question of practice. But having the time to be out there on the floor as well as in the office to have those conversations, so leading by example by being out on the floor, and also having the time to then follow it up, I suppose, and not get caught up in everything else that's going on.
One of the significant challenges for educational leaders is not to get caught up in all those other things that absolutely happen in children's education and care services. Jess, off you go. What do you think? What are the challenges?
That's where I think on behalf of our educational leaders, I would say that is where the challenge is. So we acknowledge that there is a small component of their role that is down the path of an assistant director. So they do assist with some parts of the operations of the business. So getting bogged down in those day-to-day things, sometimes all day, is a real challenge for them, and being able to define to the educators, what they should be coming to them and what they shouldn't be. As an approved provider and the manager of early learning, I think our challenge over time has been defining those two roles. So defining what the educational leaders' responsibilities and sort of daily duties would be, as opposed to the centre director, and that just keeps coming about because things keep changing, externally with regulations and more compliance and things like that, but also internally with different structures of administration support in our main offices and things like that, which then impact into the centres about what they are and aren't doing, which then flows through to the educational leaders. So I would say that day-to-day stuff is what sort of challenges their time, and then trying to bring people on board, which I think we're at a pretty good position now after a couple of years of having a dedicated educational leader. The position of our philosophies and our visions for the centre are really pretty strong now, and any sort of new educators that will come in, even if they were not experienced in those particular philosophies or approaches, can see it happening, and it's a little easier now for them to get people on board, even if they are resistant at the start or not experienced with that. So, but there's still those challenges for them pretty regularly.
And I guess this also leads to a conversation around reflective practice, which lies at the heart of the work that we do, and of course is now an exceeding theme, the notion of critical reflective practice being part of the conversations we're having on a daily basis. Educational leaders have been identified as people who are really pivotal in that, in driving that culture. So I think it would be really helpful to get a sense of how you build that critical reflective practice work. Rowena, you've already mentioned how important it is that educational leaders are reflective first, but how do you then do that work with your team? So do you want to start us off with that conversation?
So we do it in lots of different ways, both formally and informally. We do the practitioner inquiry projects over a long period of time. We also made sure that our staff meetings and our team meetings became pedagogically focused, and we fiercely protect planning reflection time. I think that's really, really important. Because they need that time and space to be able to do that. And then we also find leaders from within our centre as well, which I think helps encourage that reflection in the areas that they're interested in at the moment. So we have, example, some educators who are leading our Kids Matter project with the whole team, but they're taking the lead with that, and that's promoting that reflection. And same with our RAP working group. We have educators who have had a particular interest in that and wanted to explore their leadership, so they're leading that area as well of reflection. So,
And Kylie, the constraints of school aged care are tricky in bringing people together from time to time. How do you generate some reflective practice time with your team?
Yeah, I suppose it's one of the big things across everything to do with the role, and everything within a service of school aged care is to make it specific to your service. You were saying earlier, not to get caught up in what the service is doing down the road just because they do it that way. So there's certain things like working groups sound fabulous, but just wouldn't work for us time restriction wise. We've got a team of 40 and 3 of us are permanent, the rest are casual. So they may only be in for 3 hours once a fortnight. So it's finding those, I suppose, natural ways for it to occur and ways that take the fear out of it. It doesn't need to be another thing feared from that big national quality framework that sits on the shelf that scares everyone. So I suppose for me it was just shifting the way I was asking questions and being more conscious of the language that I was using, and then pointing out to them at the end of that, I didn't mention critical reflection, but are you aware that we just spent half an hour doing that? Just to make it, I suppose, a little bit more real for them.
And Jess, that space for critical reflection, how, as an approved provider, how do you see your educational leaders driving that? What is their role in that?
So we do a lot of work as a group, and we have different things that we do in terms of, so we have that educational leader get-together meeting on a regular basis, where that will sometimes drive the reflective practice back into the centre, that they'll, might go into an inquiry project, or they might, deliver it in some way that captures people's opinions and creates a discussion. We also have other groups that meet together, so we have our infant pedagogy groups, so they'll come together. Some are educational leaders and some are not, but coming together to think about what's going on in terms of infant pedagogy and what the practices are and what the challenges are that people are facing in the constraints that we have. And likewise with preschool at age, we're trying to get our early childhood teachers to really engage with some critical conversations and reflective practice around that preschool age space, which can be challenging for us in the ACT. So we do things like that, which really encourage then the conversations to go back into the services, and the educational leaders are the ones that are driving that and finding the right strategies and tools to actually have those discussions and engage people with that.
It sounds very clear that you all said the importance of dedicating some time and being really determined to figure out when that happens, and when it can't for various reasons, figuring out clever ways for some of those reflective practice conversations to happen. We're sort of coming to the end of our panel discussion today, and one of the things that we know is really helpful is the networking conversations that happen, and we're really lucky to be able to have lots of mechanisms now to have networking conversations across Australia. And this resource is, this video is part of a resource that will really help generate some further discussions about the role of the educational leader and how approved providers do that support that's required on a daily basis. I'm interested, just by way of conclusion, what your advice would be to people who are thinking about the role of an educational leader, either becoming one, taking on the responsibility in their particular context, or a bit of advice for an approved provider who is either recruiting them or figuring out what to do in terms of supporting an educational leader. So maybe, Jess, you want to start us off by saying, what advice would you give?
For an educational leader role, look, I think we're pretty privileged to have multiple full-time roles available to us, but I think no matter whatever your restrictions are, whether it's full-time, whether you can only offer someone a part-time role or a couple of hours a week or whatever it may be, is to just be really clear in what that person is expected to achieve in that time, and then that sort of flows through to how other educators will then interact with them, and it defines, I guess, how they're able to pursue that role. And but I think that's the biggest thing with how we've evolved it over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, is really defining it from a centre director role, from an assistant director role, and from an educator role.
And making it very clear
very clear.
And do you have position descriptions?
Yes, we have very comprehensive position descriptions, and they are what we want them to be. With the regulation, it's pretty broad to have an educational leader, and ours is pretty comprehensive, and it's what we want them to do at the YMCA in that role.
Great. Great advice, I think. Rowena, advice to educational leaders, and I wonder whether you can help us out by thinking about the educational leader who's just starting and think, oh gosh, what's the role? And maybe a bit of advice for an educational leader who's a bit more experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I would say it's okay not to know everything. I think that's really important. And to invest in your own professional learning. So whether that is through just professional reading or through networking or through formal qualifications, I think that's really, really helpful for people at all, areas of their career. I think embracing and learning about different types of leadership, particularly around transformative leadership or distributive leadership, I think is really helpful. And I think probably most importantly is just working with your provider or director on that to create a role that suits the context of your service, because it will always be unique for it to work really well.
And in terms of that uniqueness, have you had to talk to families about what that role is? We've touched on that a little bit, but I'm wondering whether that's a bit of the work that has to happen.
Yeah, I think it is. I think families are, and again, how that looks in any setting will be so different. So in our setting, we're run by a parent management committee, so I'm invited to be a part of that group so that they can be connected from a pedagogical focus with what's going on at the service, so that's really helpful. And then I have lots of different relationships and conversations informally and formally with families as well, and promote teaching and learning through things, anything from maintaining our Facebook page to producing publications and things like that for the service as well. So.
Great, thank you. And Kylie, advice to
an
educational leader who's starting off, but perhaps in a school aged care program, and maybe one who's a bit experienced. What's your advice?
I think reach out to someone. I think a lot of people are freaked out taking on that role in the sense of not having up until now a lot of supportive documents. There's a lot of fact sheets and that kind of stuff, but nothing as huge as this, for lack of a better word. But I would doubt that anyone that's been in the role for a few years would turn someone away if they sent them an email or contacted the service saying, I just don't even know where to start, or I'm really struggling, this is the idea that I've got, have you done anything similar? I know I certainly wouldn't be. I'd be giving them the time. So definitely, to reach out to someone. The points that Ro touched on, specific to your service, not getting caught up in what everybody else is doing, make the role beneficial for your service, and that will look and should look completely different. I think that a lot of people got frustrated with the ambiguity of the role to start with, but I actually love how ambiguous it was and what that allowed us to do with it, that started out when it first came in and what we could build it to be. Go to as much professional development as possible, and as we touched on, it doesn't have to be a paid session. It could be a networking, following a Facebook page, reading something, but not forgetting your own. If you are in a position, like I mentioned earlier, where you're in control of the service's budget, not to forget yourself.
Yes.
To put some aside, and that's okay, because in some ways that will be shared with a greater number of people than if you send one or two educators off to something. Yeah.
Very wise advice. I think one of the things that's really powerful about hearing from people who live and breathe the role and who are on a daily basis supporting the practice of educational leaders, you just start to connect the ideas and things that you've been thinking about with people who've actually had a go at some of these things. So we hope that this panel discussion has been an opportunity for you to clarify some of your thinking. Perhaps it sparked a couple of really new ideas about things that you have yet to explore. And we would really encourage you now to have this sort of discussion with your colleagues, the people who manage your service, the approved provider, with indeed families potentially, about what the role has the potential of creating and how it can maximise the opportunities for children and families in their diverse locations across Australia. Thank you very much.